Hello, gentle viewer. I'm Miles, and this is a second look. Today, we're talking about character death in Dungeons and Dragons. More specifically, how we bring characters back from it. Because death in D&D is strange. On one hand, the game tells us these characters are heroic, larger than life adventurers who stand toe-to-toe with dragons, demons, and gods. On the other hand, a couple of bad dice rolls can erase them from existence. And yet, as characters grow in level, death slowly becomes less permanent. Revivify, raise dead, resurrection. Suddenly, dying feels less like an ending, and more like a temporary inconvenience. A speed bump on the road to the next dungeon. But that wasn't always the intent. In earlier editions, death mattered. Souls resisted returning, bodies suffered lasting consequences, and resurrection was rare, costly, and serious. It wasn't something you handled between tavern stops. Which brings us to how it often looks at modern tables. So, your character has died. How exactly do you bring them back in Dungeons and Dragons? You're near the end of a brutal fight with 4 ogres when a few bad dice rolls send your character crashing to the ground. A couple of failed death saves later, they're gone. The party gathers around your body. Quiet, still. This has happened before. Usually, a quick revivify saves the day. Except this time, the druid and the cleric lock eyes in panic. Both of them are out of spell slots. With heavy sighs and sagging shoulders, the party lifts your body onto the barbarian's back and begins the long walk toward town. They find the local church, scrape together a few hundred gold, drop it into a donation box. The priest chants for a few minutes, and a few hours later, your character gasps back to life. Good as new, maybe with a few interesting scars to brag about to the barmaids. Simple, right? But should it work that way? Because character death sucks, it changes the mood of the room instantly. When my last character died, I'll be honest, I was pissed. That death was completely preventable, and I liked that character. But raising her wasn't an option. We didn't have a spellcaster capable of doing it, and we didn't have the gold to pay someone else. So I rolled up a new character. One I enjoy just as much. But looking back, should it really work the way we often play it? Should a party be able to walk into any random church and have someone raise the dead? Is the power to return souls to living bodies really that common? And if it is, why isn't it happening constantly? Why aren't the wealthy and powerful being resurrected every time tragedy strikes? If even a handful of temples can raise the dead, then kings and nobles would never truly die. Death would become something only the poor experience. And then there are the gods. Because clerics don't actually raise the dead, they ask their deity to do it. So why would a god agree? Souls are valuable, high-level adventurer souls even more so. Gods don't need gold, so what's the incentive? And what happens when the soul doesn't belong to that god? Isn't it effectively theft for one deity to reclaim a soul claimed by another? Wouldn't that cause divine conflict? Why would a lawful good god allow their priest to resurrect a chaotic evil person? Or someone who never worshipped them at all? And imagine being a lifelong devotee. You pray every day, you tithe, you serve faithfully. Then misfortune strikes. Your child dies. Despite your endless prayers, your God does nothing. Your child remains dead. Then a group of strangers walks into your church, drops some gold on the altar, and walks out with their slain companion restored to life. How long before that worshipper starts questioning their faith? Why would anyone remain loyal to a deity who ignores their true followers, but grants miracles to anyone who can afford to hire them? The reason gods deal with mortals at all is simple. Worship, prayer, and souls. That's where their power comes from. The more followers a god has, the more influence they gain. And when those followers die, their souls still have value. Gold coins don't matter to gods. Belief does, which makes resurrection even stranger. Why would a god return a soul to life that never worshipped them? What's the motivation? Because from a divine perspective, that's a bad investment. And it gets worse. Imagine a lawful good harvest god with a small chapel in some farming village. Now imagine that God agrees to reincarnate a chaotic evil character. Not only is that morally questionable, it's dangerous. Because some other god, archfiend, or demon has already claimed that soul. It isn't some forgotten scrap drifting through limbo. That soul is valuable, and its absence will be noticed. Souls are power. They fuel the endless wars of the lower planes. You don't just take something like that unnoticed. And you don't take it without consequence. So now resurrection isn't just a spell. It's an interplanar incident, a theft, a declaration of conflict. That god would be smart to refuse the spell outright, for fear of retaliation. And yet, at most tables, it's treated like buying healing potions. Or renting a room at an inn. So, how do we use resurrection in the game without completely breaking the lore? Because these spells exist, and players should get to use the powerful abilities they've earned. The first, and easiest, is Revivify. It's a low-level spell. It only works if the character has been dead for a minute or less. At that point, the soul probably hasn't even fully left the body yet, much less reached its final destination. Their god may not even know they've died. So I treat Revivify like an advanced healing spell. Not true resurrection, more like jump starting a heart. Now Reincarnate, this one is wild. The soul comes back, but not always in the same body. Different race, different gender, different form. Narratively, it's extremely risky. Most players don't want their barbarian coming back as a female halfling. Most of the time, they'd rather just roll up a new character. And then there's Raise Dead. This is the hard one. Because now the soul is gone, claimed by whatever entity had rightful ownership. If the god being asked to raise them owns the soul, why would they give it back? It's a big ask, and if that god doesn't own the soul, why would they do it at all? Can they even do it? A god like Moradin might not worry about angering a lesser demon. On a pure power level, that's a non-issue. But Moradin is a god of law, and a god of good. If a demon lawfully earned that soul, taking it is theft. And if that soul belonged to a 12th level anti-paladin, Moradin isn't going to willingly unleash that kind of evil back into the world. So why would he agree? That requires a conversation with a god, and concessions, not gold, not errands, but service, powerful mortals acting as divine tools, champions who carry out that god's will. The resurrected character may be required to abandon their evil path, to spend their second life repairing the harm they caused, or to be used as a weapon against something even worse. They may not get to be that character anymore. If a character keeps casting these spells, eventually that god should start asking questions. Why are you constantly using divine power on strangers? Why are you raising people who don't serve this faith? Why are you stealing souls from rival powers? And why aren't you spending that same energy helping my followers? In closing, character death should be rare. These are heroic stories. Your characters should have better than average chances of success. But death should always remain a possibility, a consequence. As characters grow in power, the ability to return from death becomes available. And players should be allowed to use those abilities. They earned them, but dungeon masters need to treat resurrection with the seriousness it deserves. Paying someone to raise the dead should not feel like renting a room at an inn or buying a new sword. Make finding a powerful enough caster difficult. Make the party explain why their companion should be returned. At the very least, require a change of faith, not a side quest. A god doesn't need mortals to run errands. They can arrange that themselves. But gaining a handful of 10th level followers? That's a meaningful investment, and hopefully, your character will never need to be raised again. I'm Miles, and thank you for joining me to take a second look.